for the state of Oregon, and we are excited to finally share some draft rules that we have been working on. We have 3 sessions left of the RAC, so I'm going to turn it over to Carol to do some housekeeping, and then Ann will get us started.
Good morning, everyone. This is just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded. We will publish it on our OMB RAC rulemaking website after this meeting. And for members of the RAC, as we are sharing information in the chat, we'll make sure to verbalize that for participants that are viewing our live stream today, since you will not be able to see that using Teams. And one other small reminder for both members of the public as well as our RAC members, so we don't forget here, is that our November 24th RAC meeting is canceled. And so just a short little reminder that we won't be having a RAC meeting during that week. As Dina said, we just have about 3 more meetings. So thank you all for being here, and we'll now go through introductions, and I will throw it over to Ann.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks everybody for being here. My name is Ann Burke-Jones. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Elections Administration Manager here at State Elections. And I will pass it around to all the RAC members to make sure that we can all introduce ourselves, and then we'll get started. So I will pass over to Dina.
Hi, everyone. Dina Dawson, State Elections Director, and I will pass it over to Michelle.
Hi, my name is Michelle Godin. I work as a TSR1 in the Coos Bay field office, and I'm here representing SEIU. I will pass it over to David.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Becker. I'm the Executive Director and founder of the nonpartisan nonprofit Center for Election Innovation and Research based in Washington, D.C., and we do a lot of work in the voter registration space. I'll pass it over to you, Tracy.
Good morning, everyone. Tracy Kravenko, Clatsop County Clerk, here representing the Oregon Association of County Clerks, and I will pass it off to Kat.
Hi, I'm Kat Schwartz. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with ODOT and DMV as the voter registration analyst, and I'll pass to Ulysses.
Hey, good morning. My name is Ulysses. I use he, him pronouns. I'm here with the Innovation Law Lab. Let's see. Who am I missing?
That's everybody.
I think that's everyone. Okay.
Yeah. So again, thank you all for being here. This is, it's been about 2 months that we've been meeting every week. So really appreciate all of the feedback and suggestions that we've been getting so far. So we will start today with actually presented some rules in draft form. We're going to start with covering Oregon motor voter registration activities during covered transactions at the Department of Motor Vehicles. So I do want to just preface this that we will be displaying these in rule form, but unfortunately I'm not 100% confident on section, subsection, and paragraph and all of those intricacies of rules. So do apologize there. The format will look like administrative rules. It's not, of course, final until we actually get those submitted. So I will typically be using those interchangeably. So apologies for anybody that cares very deeply about that precise language. So we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to go through it in order. The first couple sections will have to bounce around a little bit just for some logic purposes as we go from like a section to a subsection to paragraphs, but the rest of it should flow. What I would say for RAC members is we tried to incorporate feedback and anything that was offered during the last few weeks. We have about 20 slides to go through this morning. So we should have plenty of time. If you have questions, if you have comments that you want to add as we go through, just raise your hand and we'll go ahead and address those. Yeah, any questions before we get started from RAC members? All right. Yeah, Vanessa, we can just move on to the next slide and get started. So the rules essentially start like this. They're found in that chapter 165 of the Oregon Administrative Rules. And Section 1 starts Oregon motor voter registration during covered transactions at the Department of Motor Vehicles for qualified individuals. These will be broken into 2 subsections: qualified individuals included in OMV registration, and then individuals excluded from OMV registration at DMV. So we can expand to the next slide, where we will break down those qualified individuals included in OMV registration at the DMV are defined as must be a U.S. citizen, must be at least 16 years old pursuant to Oregon Revised Statute 247-016, and then must be an Oregon resident. And we will expand that top section a little further. So must be a United States citizen. To further explain what's going on there, only an individual with a record of providing documentation to the DMV establishing that an individual is a U.S. citizen in compliance with Oregon Revised Statute 807.040 and Oregon Administrative Rule 735-062-0020. Those are both like DMV sections of law where they've defined what those documents are. Further definitions are found in ORS 807-455 and OAR 735-062-022. Those will be registered through the OMV process. To support these efforts, the DMV shall create, maintain, and prominently display on each workstation conducting covered transactions 4 distinct reference documents concerning citizenship verification. And we'll expand on that here on the next slide. The reference materials required under paragraph 2 shall be reviewed, evaluated, and formally approved for continued use by the DMV at least once every 12 months. So now diving a little bit deeper, DMV reference documents concerning citizenship verification, 4 distinct categories. 1, a document identifying forms of evidence that conclusively establish U.S. citizenship. 2, a document identifying forms of evidence that conclusively disprove U.S. citizenship. 3, a document identifying forms of evidence that are indeterminate with respect to citizenship status. And 4, a document containing instructions and guidance regarding the presentation of identity documents issued by United States territories as they relate to determinations of citizenship and voter eligibility. So that is kind of the accordion. That's as much of the jumping in as we'll do. And now as we continue on, we will get back to kind of the main section. So this is now defining individuals excluded from OMV registration. You can see up the top, this is section 1, subsection B. Individuals who present documents identified on a citizenship reference document that conclusively disprove U.S. citizenship. Individuals who present documents identified on the citizenship reference documents as indeterminate with respect to citizenship status. Participants in the Oregon Department of Justice Address Confidentiality Program pursuant to Oregon Revised Statute 192-822. Individuals or their family members who have a current safety exemption from the DMV pursuant to ORS 192-455. Continued on in this section, law enforcement officials. Let's go back to that last slide, Vanessa. Go back to, I think. Keep going back. 1B and then E at the top. So next slide. There we go. So more individuals excluded from OMV registration. We have law enforcement officials participating in a covered transaction pursuant to OAR 135, 062, 0290. That's for fictitious credentials, just since that wasn't spelled out. Public employees or their family members who do not submit a residence address to the DMV pursuant to ORS 802-250. Anyone categorized by the DMV as a continuous traveler pursuant to OAR 735-062-0030. Individuals who do not provide their own electronic signature to the DMV, and then individuals with open DMV fraud cases. So as we get started, that's very, very high level on who will be included and who will be excluded from the OMV process. Any questions, any comments from RAC members at this stage as far as just defining who's included?
Could you go back a couple slides, I think, to the covered ones, just so I can look at that again?
For those included?
Yeah.
Sorry, how far back do you want me to go?
Yeah, Vanessa, let's
here?
just go back all the way to slide 2, and we'll just slowly go through that section again, now that we all kind of know what to expect.
Sorry, my little clicker's going wacko. Apologies. Let's see here.
Yeah.
It's going like in the opposite direction for some reason. Here we go. Apologies.
It is okay. All right. So qualified individuals, U.S. citizen, 16 years old at least, and an Oregon resident. And then those are then further explained through the next few slides, specifically around citizenship and how that is defined.
Okay, yeah, this one. Oh, okay, so you're just breaking down that we have these different forms of kind of different categories of documents.
Yeah, really, that was
Okay.
the intention of it, was trying to show that we needed to have these documents available that are showing the different categories and where somebody would fit. So these need to be ready and available for DMV technicians to be able to reference. Yeah.
Okay, I think those
I-
are make sense, but yeah, Michelle.
The only question that I have is on the part just before this, it says that it'll be prominently displayed at each workstation. And I'm trying to figure out what the intent is behind that. So you want those like, because those are like multiple pages for each one of those documents. So how would we prominently display them at each workstation? Like, what is the thought process behind prominently displayed? Or are you just wanting it available for, us to hand over if anybody had any questions? So
Well,
that's
the
different.
yeah, that's a good question. So the intention of this was the reference document for DMV staff. That's what we would be pointing at. And so this would be so that DMV technicians have the tools available to determine, depending on the evidence that was provided, which category that they would fit in.
Oh, okay.
Prominently displayed was just trying to find language to make it, make it stick, like that the field offices had to make these available for the technicians at each workstation.
Okay. I was reading that from a consumer point of view of they have to be able to see this prominently displayed at each workstation. I was trying to figure out how I was going to make that happen.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. Thank you for asking that. And perhaps we can clarify that a little bit better.
I wouldn't mind promptly available, something that is readily available to anybody, right? Because that list isn't held secret from consumers or from our customers. It's just trying to figure out how to promptly display it, I think would be confusing for people because we don't have the room on every single station to put all of that out there on each station on the customer side.
Okay. Yeah, and again, we weren't anticipating that this would be public facing, that the customers would have to see these documents. That was one of the reasons we were trying to define where the law already addresses as much of these documents as we can in that previous section. But this was specifically trying to address the information and notification that's happening at the DMV to make sure that that you all had what you needed. So I'll make a note of this one that we might be able to further clarify that that is intended to be internal facing and not public facing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm mulling that one over still on what it achieves exactly, because our system already creates those different buckets already automatically based on the document presented. So yeah, can you help explain what it is supposed to accomplish?
Yeah, so I think it's going to end up kind of going back and yeah, if we just leave it on this slide right here. So the intention was to support the efforts of verifying what their documentation or where it lives. And then this third paragraph here, the reference materials required shall be reviewed, evaluated, and formally approved at least every 12 months. So the idea is that it's not just like a field service manual that you all have as a reference, but you also have these specific reference documents that are talking about the categorization of the evidence that's presented and how it relates to citizenship. That way, that can be more flexible. It can be updated at least once a year to make sure that it is accurate. I mean, that was really the intention of it. And we're trying to build this process out to, again, have the rigor behind it, that so not just our agencies have confidence, but the public at large has confidence that individuals that are being included in these covered transactions are having their qualifications verified.
And I just want to add to that, that the 4 documents on the next page that are specifically being called out are informed by this RAC. There was multiple discussions, if we go back to those early meetings, where RAC members discussed having a list that has ambiguous qualifications that would kind of help lead the technician down the right path. And so these were informed by RAC discussions. So I just wanted to highlight that piece there, that those documents were discussed and informed by the RAC. And then going backwards from that, we're like, okay, we're going to have these 4 documents that maybe already exist there, but we're calling it out in rule. And then where will they be? So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I think the physical naming, like having them be at workstations, might be a little too specific, because that just might not work for offices. We don't want to be putting stuff that just overcrowding those counters. So it might end up being that there's a reference form, at every office, just prominently displayed, but maybe not at every workstation. So I think we'll have to. I'll take that back for more feedback, but I know that just adding anything to a workstation is it takes up room, and we have pretty small workstations, so it should be really really necessary. And I think that this process is already happening quite automatically, and the technician I wouldn't say doesn't need these unless they're in training. But they know how to categorize. We have the buckets done in the system. So they have to enter certain fields, and if we're entering a wrong field, it'll say you're in the wrong spot. So I think that there's already those. I see the point of having them in a list form, but I just don't know that it's actually going to be referenced to the point that it needs to be at everyone's workstation.
Yeah, the list form that we're using is more for the consumer. That's why I immediately went to why it would be available to the consumer and the customer versus me as a technician. I have it available to me on my computer all the time through our SharePoint and through our policies and forms and all of that. So this that number 2 line sounds more like making sure that it's available for citizens to be able to review and make sure that they are being able to hand over something that would confirm, not necessarily the technician being able to just know what it is. Because like Kat said, our computers are all, our system now really does break it down into the different buckets. And we have it readily available for us all the time on our computers under our forms section. So printing and maintaining it and having it displayed would be more for being able to hand it out if somebody had a question about it.
Excellent. Thank you for that feedback, both of you. We'll make some notes on this section and come back to it. Okay. Any comments on the individuals excluded section? That was fairly unchanged. I think the only thing that we specifically added that was not previously in the manual was referencing those individuals under open DMV fraud cases. Okay, we can just continue on. So the next section is covered OMV registration interactions at the DMV. And so to define those covered OMV interactions, we have a qualified individual applies for an original driver's license, permit, or identification card pursuant to either ORS 807 or .40 or ORS 807.455. B, a qualified individual renews a driver's license, permit, or ID to those same chapters, or C, applies for a replacement driver's license, permit, or ID card. So those are our covered OMV transactions. And now 3, oh, looks like that one jumped ahead a little bit, Vanessa. There we go. So section 3 is our OMV registration process now for qualified individuals at the DMV. So this will just list kind of in a list form. Prior to concluding the business associated with a covered transaction, the DMV technician shall notify all apparently qualified individuals that it has been determined that they are qualified to register to vote and that their information will be transferred to the Secretary of State for the purpose of voter registration as required by ORS 247-017. To further expand on that, the voter registration qualification notice must be presented to the apparently qualified individuals on a screen or on a form and must be part of the official transaction. So this is really starting out, this was the main feedback that we had heard from RAC members, is that individuals need to know when their information is being sent for voter registration, but also trying to incorporate the feedback from our folks at DMV that they didn't want to start these conversations or have all of these verbal interactions if at all possible. So we're specifically calling out that this needs to just be in writing. It could be on a screen or on a form, but it just needs to be included as part of that transaction. So the Secretary of State shall develop, review, and evaluate the voter registration qualification notice at least once every 12 months. The DMV shall ensure the current approved voter registration qualification notice is presented to every apparently qualified individual. The voter registration qualification notice shall identify the consequences associated with registering to vote when not qualified. The voter registration qualification notice shall include a disclaimer that ORS 247-017 mandates voter registration for qualified individuals through the OMV process, and that qualified individuals will have the opportunity to opt out of registration later through a separate process. The DMV shall ensure that the voter registration qualification notice is available in the 5 most commonly spoken languages in each county other than English, as determined by the Secretary of State pursuant to ORS 251-167. The DMV technician administering the voter registration qualification process shall provide each apparently qualified individual with a discrete means to privately indicate that they do not meet the voter registration eligibility qualifications. Individuals who indicate that they do not meet qualifications during the registration qualification process must be assigned a unique legal presence indicator in the Oregon License Issuance and Vehicle Registration System, the Oliver system, and they shall not be included in OMV. The identities of these individuals shall be protected by ORS 180-805 and ORS 188-10, and they shall not be disclosed other than to the Secretary of State for purposes of voter list maintenance. At the close of each covered transaction, DMV technicians shall provide qualified individuals with an OMV explainer document created and approved by the Secretary of State. The DMV shall ensure that the OMV explainer is available in the 5 most commonly spoken languages in each county, other than English, as determined by the Secretary of State pursuant to ORS 251-167. The Secretary of State shall review, update, and provide the DMV with an electronic copy of the OMV explainer document at least once every 12 months. The DMV will be responsible for printing and distributing the approved version of the OMV explainer. If a covered transaction occurs within 30 days of a standard voter registration deadline, DMV technicians shall advise apparently qualified individuals of the pending voter registration deadline and offer them the opportunity to register to vote through the electronic DMV voter registration process. That's EDVR. That's defined in ORS 247-019.
I had a question on that.
Yeah.
It just popped into my brain. Was what if we do like a QR code where they can go in and find the explainer, and then they would be able to get it in their language at that point as well, or as an option? I'm just trying to think of trying to save space with having 5 different languages of that OMV in multiple locations at a DMV. I always go to my small office, right? I've got a one person office in Coquille that I work at on a regular basis. I'm trying to figure out where we would even have that available in the 5 languages to hand out, just because that it is a small room. So I'm just trying to figure out how to make that work. And I was thinking, well, if it was a QR code, they would be able to then go and find it under their language and print it out.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. Thanks, Michelle. I currently, I think as the rule, how it's currently drafted, we say that it has to be printed, but providing electronic copy I would think satisfy what we're trying to do here, because we're just trying to get information to those individuals. So just make a note about those digital copies.
And then, yeah, I had a question regarding that language thing as well.
Go ahead, Tracy.
You said the most common languages in the county, the 5 most. So not every county is going to have the same top 5. I don't know if that would be difficult for the DMV to have those in the specific, depending on what county they were in, knowing which ones were the most common at that time, because I know it will change as well. It does change.
Yeah, it is a dynamic list that our office produces based on community surveys, and we update that, I think, at least annually. But I think that goes hand in hand with Michelle's suggestion. If these OMV explainers were provided digitally, it would be easy to maintain a library of all of the top languages other than English, instead of just those 5 in the county.
And I'll want to review pretty much all the slides we've gone through, but I thought I'd let you finish because I just want to look at them more closely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I'll just say that to everybody on the rack, because I know that we're just rolling through this in the rule format, and so it's not the easiest way to digest and provide good feedback. So we will have a couple weeks to modify some things before we have to file the rules, and then there will also be a public comment period that will pass before the rules are actually promulgated and authorized. So still lots of opportunity for feedback. So once once we're done with this session, I can say that we will definitely send out the slideshow to all RAC members and solicit feedback in the upcoming weeks. Okay. So I think we just finished that slide. So standard voter registration deadlines include the deadlines for March, May, August, and November special elections. Those are the 4 regularly scheduled election dates that occur in the state of Oregon every year. Recall elections are excluded from standard voter registration deadlines because those can come up at any point. Not later than December 31st of each year, the Secretary of State will provide the DMV with a document each year that identifies those voter registration EDVR deadlines. That is the OMV registration process for qualified individuals. So
the question.
Yes, Tracy.
On that last section, are we going to define the EDVR deadlines? What that entails? Only because I know what my voter registration deadline is, and I believe they have an earlier one in order for the forms to get to the people in time, like 30 days before a registration deadline. If they go in and register anywhere in that 30 days, go into DMV, it's not going to get to us in time, more than likely.
So this was pointing folks to the EDVR process,
right?
Which that's the one that generates the electronic card. That those are delivered every night to county clerk's offices.
Okay.
So that was during the 30 days before the voter registration deadline, because of that waiting period that happens, and because we have a 21-day registration deadline in the state, that qualified individuals should have the opportunity to register using EDVR during the 30 days before the voter registration deadline. So anybody that appears, even on the deadline, if they submit an EDVR transaction that day, it would be effective that day, and so it would qualify.
Okay.
Does that
Thank you.
satisfy the concerns?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, on that, I think it's a pretty difficult programming ask, I think, to be able to flip that on and off. It's not something that we can just change very easily, because you have to go through the criteria of who would be offered EDVR. And so I just don't know. It would also add to quite a bit of our transaction time, which is something to consider. But if we decide we should do it, then we'll do it. But that's just a pretty big change to try to be doing, during those election, coming up on election registration. It just is. That's something we will do. We'll change our EDVR programming if something major is happening with our system. We did that when we changed over to Oliver. So it's just not something we would do on a basis of things changing week by week typically, because it's such a big IS labor intensive process. And I don't know if we can maybe look into trying to make it something we can switch on and off easier, but as of right now, I just don't think that one's going to be something we can implement anytime soon.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, the way that it works now is if the OMV is too far or is too close to an election, so now the EDVR or manual, we have to communicate with people to do that. It's not something that we have on our computers for them to do immediately. So we have the paper registration forms available at all stations during that time. And we have the communication of if you were wanting to make sure that you were registered before this next election, these are the two ways that you need to do it. And so they can either go to the website for Secretary of State, or they could fill out the form and hand it back over, you know. But I think adding it to the actual transaction of that would extend out the conversation, I guess, a little bit more. Because that would have to be done before we get to the point of picture and handing it over, which is kind of our end of our transaction completely. That would have to happen before even that part happened or payment happened. That conversation would have to shift.
Yes. So currently, this is the process for anyone that presents documents that are ambiguous, that where you don't know whether they are citizens or not. Is currently NVRA is requiring you to offer them the EDVR
Yes.
process, right?
But it's not offered to somebody who is qualified for Oregon Motor Voter in the interim between the automatic versus deadline to actually be registered. If it's that like couple of weeks before, 30 days before, where they have to do it manually, it's not offered to OMV currently.
Okay.
It's all, am I
Yeah,
making
and that makes
sense with
sense.
that?
And yeah,
Okay.
that does make sense. And I think that was the piece that we were trying to kind of bridge the gap for this specific, for those few weeks between leading up to a voter registration deadline. That's the exact bucket of folks that we were trying to reach with this. Those that are qualified, but through the OMV automatic voter registration process, that would not be concluded in time to participate in the next election. That's exactly what we were trying to address with this particular provision. What I guess I would ask, Kat, if you could ask your tech team to kind of tell us how big of a lift this is. How long would it take to get this available or not? Since it would be a programming change. Like I think we understand that completely. So yeah, if you could do a
Definitely, I'll
little
get there.
research and bring back some feedback from the team, that
Yeah.
would be helpful.
Will do.
Okay, so we can move on to section 4, signature collection during covered transactions at the DMV. So DMV technicians collecting customer signatures shall advise individuals that the signature they provide may be used for other official purposes and direct customers to use their natural, consistent signature. DMV shall post the following notice on each pin pad used for OMV signature collection. If you are eligible to vote, please be aware that this signature may be used to verify the signature on your ballot envelope. And the next slide. Pin pads used for the collection of voter registration signatures must meet or exceed the following standards: dimensions of 500 by 175 and a resolution of 96 dpi. And thanks, Kat, for sending over these specifications. For everyone's information, these are the specifications of the photo capture stations that currently exist at DMV. And then within 2 business days of the Secretary of State requesting a signature file, the DMV shall make available the most recent signature obtained during a covered transaction. The DMV shall collect a new signature from qualified individuals who change their name during a covered transaction. And that is signature collection. Any comments, feedback on that? Okay. So section 5 is voter registration at the DMV for those whose qualifications are unknown. We touched on this briefly earlier, so this should be a review. When an individual presents identifying forms of evidence that are indeterminate with respect to citizenship status, the DMV technician shall offer the individual the opportunity to register to vote through the EDVR process in ORS 247-019. Consistent with the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, not quite sure exactly how to say that. An individual shall be registered to vote through the EDVR process if they attest under penalty of perjury that they meet all eligibility requirements, including U.S. citizenship, and do not decline to be registered to vote. So this is all currently happening. There's no changes in that section. We're just further defining it. Number 6, voter registration when updating an address through DMV programs. The DMV shall create and maintain an address change transaction report that identifies for each address change transmitted to the Secretary of State the source type, and source type indicator. The DMV and the Secretary of State shall jointly review the address change transaction report at least once every 12 months. Following each review, the Secretary of State shall notify the DMV of any transaction source types that are to be excluded from the OMV and voter registration processes. The DMV shall exclude these transaction types identified by the Secretary of State from data transmissions. We'll continue on this section. Upon notification from the Secretary of State, the DMV shall implement the exclusion of the identified transaction types from data transmissions within a reasonable timeframe necessary to complete required technical or programming changes. When a transaction results in the transmission of address information to the Secretary of State, the DMV shall inform the customer that the address provided may be used for other official purposes, including voter registration and the mailing of ballots. The DMV shall include the source type indicator in the address files transmitted to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State shall include the source type indicator when making the data available to counties. So this was trying to address all of the different ways an individual's address gets changed with DMV, and specifically the feedback from RAC members that we want to isolate those that are initiated by the individual, that we have a high confidence in the integrity of those, and exclude those transactions that we do not have a high integrity, or we don't have a high faith in, like those specifically the vehicle registration transactions. So that's what this section is trying to address.
I think I have a question on, if we could go back to that on D. It says that we needed to inform them that the address change. Sorry.
Yeah, D is when a transaction results in the transmission of address information to the Secretary of State, the DMV shall inform the customer that the address provided may be used for other official purposes, including voter registration and mailing of ballots.
So when a customer comes in, so I'm thinking of scenarios, right? Like I'm trying to think of like my daily scenario. I have a gentleman that's wanting to get a handicap placard, and on the application it says he has a new address. His sister brings it in for him. So he's not there because we don't require them to be there, or he mails it in. How are we then informing them that that address change is going to be used for official purposes? Do I have to now mail them a letter that says that your address change will affect?
So I would say that the intention of this was to just ensure that there was a notification. Whether that notification lives on the form itself that the voter would have to fill out, or the individual is filling out to change their address, or if they're going online, it's a notice on the screen or something. I don't think that we were intentionally not being too prescriptive here for how that needs to be done, because there is such a wide variety of ways that you get this information from your customers. And so it was just trying to ensure that when folks are changing their addresses, that they are aware of the downstream effects.
And that is more for the customer initiating the change, and not necessarily on like a vehicle purchase or okay, I'm just trying to think of all the different types of conversations that I have with some combative people. So I always
Yeah.
go worst case scenario. And like, if I'm like, okay, that's fine, then I'm good. Right. Sorry. I don't mean to be such a pessimist.
No, you don't need to apologize. That's exactly what that's the purpose of this conversation. And that's why we really value your input for this, is because we don't want to be forcing a bunch of confrontational conversations. But we do firmly believe that individuals should know when their voter registration addresses are being changed. And so it's just trying to, it's trying to make sure that they are told at some point in the process.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to figure out to what level and what degree. Because I can see people coming and I was never told that, XYZ, that and how do I prove to that customer that they were informed? And since it's in the rules that we shall inform them, I have to have something that we can prove that we did give notification.
Tracy, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I went through this with getting a handicap placard from my mother-in-law, and I didn't send it in. The doctor filled it out, sent it in, and I got mailed the placard. Can it come just a slip of paper that comes with the placard that explains any changes that were made will be transferred as voter registration? It will be, transferred with our shared associations or whatever, that we will be using that if there was any changes.
That would come from our headquarters. If it's getting mailed in, it goes to our headquarters, and our headquarters processes that. I unfortunately have never worked out of our headquarters to be able to speak for how that process would work, if that's a possibility. I think that it would mostly be beneficial if it was on the form itself. But again, if the consumer or the customer is not seeing the form because the doctor's filling the whole thing out, what good is that?
Right.
Right. And then again, if they're to a point where they're not opening their mail or whatever, other people are doing stuff for them, again, they wouldn't get notification.
Right.
So it's just really not a huge lift. And I understand the need or the want for consumers to be informed of their address changing, if affecting other things. I'm just trying to figure out how DMV would be able to actually make that happen. And I don't know. Kat, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think back to the fact that counties do send those notifications every time there's an address change too, right? So they should be receiving something in the mail that gives them some indication like this address is being used for your voter registration. And I think the trouble comes when someone doesn't receive that, or it's not going to the actual correct address. And then we're just kind of lost not knowing what the right address is. And so I think there should be, this expectation that whenever you interact with the DMV, that you're changing your address for voter registration purposes unless you opt out somehow. And we offer that explicitly on the website when you update your address. But yeah, I think trying to put it on forms is a good way to start, because there's all these scenarios in which they might not see that or notice that. But it's the same issue when we are asking people to update their addresses for vehicles and they put a one-time address as their residence address, even though we give them the opportunity to register it totally separately. It's just this human element where there's going to be some errors, even from the customers themselves, just because they aren't thinking it through or they aren't reading the form, So I think we can try to just put some language on our forms to start, and maybe we can think about doing that if we send some sort of confirmation in the mail too, just having some language, one sentence like this is being used for your voter registration, and here's the website if you want to go change it. So I think that it might take a little bit to update our forms, but I don't think it's an impossible thing to do. What I don't think we should do is add questions into transactions regarding voter registration. That part, I think we just need to keep sending data, and then in written formats as much as we can, let people know what's happening with their information.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think that was a helpful little discussion. The one thing that I heard was a reference to the voter notification cards the county clerks send out when an address is updated. And I don't know that those are sent out weeks after somebody's address has already been changed. And so I don't know that that's serving the same purpose as a proactive notice that changing your address with DMV could affect these other addresses downstream. So we're kind of trying to approach these things from multiple angles. And so, like, to Michelle's point, like trying to think of, well, did the individual get this if their doctor filled out the form? This is going hand in hand with the same provision that we're going to look at which transaction should be sent for voter registration purposes. Because if the doctor's the one filling that out, I'm going to guess that the clerks don't want that form if the individual themselves are not filling them out and initiating that change. And so we're doing this from a couple different angles. We're going to try to get the list of addresses, the address changes that we have high confidence in voter registration. But those that we have low confidence in, we're going to exclude those. But then also, we want to ensure that people know that their addresses are being changed, because what we are seeing now is individuals getting their voter notification cards from their county clerk and going, or they're getting a confirmation card because they didn't live at that place that DMV moved them to. County clerk moves them to that location as well. It's a multiple month process to clean up that data. And so we're trying to stop it before the error affects the second system, which would be the voter registration file. So that's really the intention. We're trying to get in there before there's bad data. And then we're also going to be looking at the sources of this data on a regular basis to try to make sure that we're only getting that good data. So really appreciate the discussion as we kind of bounce back and forth on all these different approaches. Kat, I see you came off mute.
Yeah, I did also want to add that I have talked with our tech folks about the in address source, trying to add that into files, and we think we can do basically the online and in office. We can distinguish those, but maybe we can't distinguish between all these forms right now. So it would kind of be like it's either in office or they did it themselves, or it's this other bucket of everything else. And so I think that's still helpful, but I just don't know that we can get to the level of specificity right now with just the way our system works, because you can't tell what something was entered from, what form we got that address from necessarily. We can go into every record and look at like who changed it. We do have that kind of information, but we just can't produce it in a file, if that makes sense. So we can definitely investigate these things as they come up and figure out how things happened, but just sending it in a file is a little more complicated. So did want to flag that. I think we can still have some sort of field, but just trying to think of how to make it useful to you all. Yeah, so I don't know that it'll necessarily be that it came from a vehicle transaction. You just know, well, the customer didn't do it online, kind of distinction.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that extra context, Kat. So we actually, oh yeah, go ahead, Tracy.
I wanted to add to what Kat was saying is that would be fine. That way, at least for us, as long as we know that the voter did not initiate it themselves. I mean, that's what we want to eliminate, is the ones that are coming from all these other sources that's not voter initiated. So as long as I guess that could be designated that it is not voter initiated. But I guess that goes through the SOS first before it even comes to us. So that would be up to you guys.
Oh yeah, Tracy, we want to work in lockstep with the county clerks and make sure that we're filtering the data the way that you all agree with as well.
Well, and just forms can be filled out by the customer. And so it's too bad because we're, up at headquarters putting in the information that a customer put on a form. So it could be a very valid address that then we're excluding. That's kind of the trouble. But yeah, I think that's a distinction anyway we can start to make.
If I could ask, Vanessa, if you'll go back one slide, this whole thing starts with collaboration, and it talks about that annually the DMV is going to create a report, or sorry folks, if you can hear me, I have lost connectivity. Sorry, I'm not sure. I lost connectivity for a second, but going back to this, the DMV shall create and maintain an address transaction report. And so that we're envisioning as a report with all of the forms and transactions that result in an address change. And the expectation was that, each would have some sort of source type indicator. And from what I'm hearing from this conversation, that isn't something that's possible. But potentially the landing point might be whether this is voter initiated or individual initiated or completed by someone else, which sounds like that also isn't something that's doable. But the goal would be for us to get together and identify things that need to be excluded because we have no confidence or little to no confidence that the address change should be used for voter registration purposes. And it feels like through the discussion, this would be quite difficult. Even if the form was updated to say something like that has a flag that's like, alert, this voter, by providing an address here, you will be changing voter registration. And then back to Kat's point, well, the county send a card, and to address Ann's point, yep, that card goes by non-forwardable mail, which means that it's returned to the clerks as undeliverable mail, which requires that they send another notice. So this is just one of those onion layer situations, it feels like, where as we dig deeper into this, it's just messy. For the win, we haven't had this discussion before. We haven't started digging into these processes. So what we need to come up with is, just a system that helps. And just by us talking about it now, we know this needs to be addressed in a way. The proposed rule may not be doable right now, but it would be helpful for DMV, for Kat, and come back with what you would propose. And this is not meant to be easy, right? We're trying to modernize a process in Oregon that's kind of sat stagnant for a while. It's going to be stretching on DMV side, and we've imposed rigor when we get to the part of the stuff that the state is doing as well. It's not meant to be comfortable. We're trying to stretch. So just thinking about what can we do to address this, I think would be a good exercise for us to think about once you've had a chance to review the rules. So sorry. Thank you.
Thanks, Dina. I think that's very appreciated to just look at this process again and remember that we're making improvements. We don't expect this to be perfect. Like, if we knew how to write these perfect laws, then that would be great. But we're coming together to try to make some improvements on the system. And so I hope you all can see that we're trying to formalize some of this collaboration and increase the communication levels amongst all the stakeholders that are facilitating this process. Okay, so that is actually all of the materials that we have to review. I would be, without putting anybody on the spot, I would be curious to hear from our other RAC members, from the nonprofits, because a lot of your feedback and recommendations from the first few weeks kind of guided the way that we were trying to add those additional requirements on the agencies. So I'd be curious whether you see us, whether these rules would help address those issues or not. Okay.
I would be interested.
Yeah.
I want to hear from other folks too, whenever they want to chime in. But it was so much information. I do want to go look at the slides again for after the like qualifying. Once we get into all those different steps, take a look at those again would be great.
And RAC members, I'll also send you the slide deck after this meeting, just so everyone can have it quickly after for your own process.
And I'll just add that this is all new. If you look at the Oregon Motor Voter Manual right now, there are no requirements and rules associated with what the cover transactions at the DMV. So understandably, like Kat, you Michelle, you guys are going to need time to review these things because it's all brand new, but it is informed by the discussions that we've had here. And the biggest takeaway that we've had from OACC membership and county clerks and election administrators is the fact that individuals that go to the DMV have no idea that they're being registered to vote. So how do we embed that into the process? So yeah, there's a lot of brand new stuff that will need, you're going to need time to let it sink in.
So I guess just looking ahead to the remaining weeks, next week, I guess next week might be a little bit up in the air. It'll depend on how much feedback that we get from RAC members. We have rules drafted for the data transmission and the Secretary of State's and local election official processing of OMV. That's probably only 1 week's worth of material to go through. So there's a chance we could start getting into that next week if we don't have a whole lot from RAC members to talk about this section of rules. So just wanting to let folks know about that. Currently, I have down that next week we will continue the review of this section, but I don't want to just sit here if we've already covered it thoroughly. So what I would say is I would ask the RAC members to review the materials that we send out, and if you could respond that you have some feedback, you have questions, you have more discussion that you'd like to have, we'll make sure to set time aside for that at the beginning of next week's session. And then depending on how much that is, we might start getting into the data transmission rules and the rest of them. Okay, anything, we actually went through that a lot quicker than I anticipated today. So anything else from RAC members that they have for the group? Any other questions or feedback? Okay.
I guess no news is good news.
Yeah, that's how I'm trying to interpret it. So, well, thank you all again. I know that we're not done with this process, but it does feel like we're starting to get toward the end. So thank you all for the work that you've put into it. We really appreciate your input and value your perspective. We'll look forward to gathering any of that feedback over this next week, tweaking the rules a little bit, and we'll continue on presenting next week.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.